Okay, the Musicians Clinics of Canada was started in 1986, 25 years ago. It was actually the organization of Canadian symphony musicians that approached me when I was on faculty at McMaster. And it was one of the consulting projects. I was studying many types of workers and industrial diseases. So once you get to know me, it took me 3 months to answer Marie Peeble's letter at that time to start a clinic. And I said, why would we start a clinic for musicians? And then she said, well, I just went to a sports clinic and the doctor said I shouldn't play viola anymore, and why don't I just switch to French horn? I thought, oh, okay, that's really crazy. So, but what about your rehab? Well, I went to the gym with the Hamilton Ticats, and all these big 250 to 300 pound linemen were sitting beside me while I was trying to rehabilitate my left arm after a car accident. I said, okay, that's sort of convincing. And we did an initial survey of the Canadian musicians, and they said, as predicted, 60–70% had an injury prevalence, and they wanted help. So I said, okay, we'll get her going. So I approached McMaster. They laughed, and we just carried on anyway. And then we developed a big multidisciplinary rehab clinic in the early 90s, and now we're much more smaller because of the healthcare funding issues. But it's very, very busy. Well, it started with the classical musicians. That's my background. So they felt comfortable, since I'm a pianist and composer, as well as an engineer, electrical engineer. So, but over the years, it's now spread into the jazz and blues scene. I see a lot of the rock and roll industry, all the big groups. And it just seems to keep going and going and going. So the arts production and entertainment industry, over my experience of 25 years, is just massive. It's huge, and it's recession-proof. And the GDP it produces is 7th in Canada. It did not dip in 2009, even though maybe the gigs kind of went down, but they're working. Everybody's working hard, and everybody's getting hurt and needs help. Right. So over the years, I started out as a pretty straightforward doc, looking at structure and function and what went wrong. And actually, I think I missed the boat in '86 when Marie said, why don't you come to our rehearsals? Because I couldn't figure out why somebody from Indiana with a teacher like Joe Gingold, you know, the best of the best, could get injured and couldn't play. It didn't make sense to me. Right? It's not like a football player gets bammed, or a hockey player with a concussion, Nate Horton. It didn't make sense to me at that time. So over the years, I've changed my model, which is a lot more scientific about mind and body and the nature of stress. So actually in the clinic, we don't see that much big T trauma, like sports injuries or car accidents. Yes, they do happen, bike crashes, etc. But it's repetitive small T trauma. So what happens to the body when you get peppered, either psychologically or physically? The body says no. And how does it do that? Basically, with the repetitive stress, the body loses its ability to turn off the signals. So you get stressed out, cortisol goes up, and normally it comes down. The song is up. What goes up must come down, blood, sweat, and tears. But what happens, you lose that ability at a certain point physiologically, that off switch, which is the parasympathetic system, and then it's up and away, fifth dimension. And then you start getting the diseases that we have talked about in our conference. Many forms of illness. Whatever organ system blows first is what I've been seeing. So we have a very sick population, very stressed out population for economic and artistic reasons. So the show goes on, as they say. So if you think conceptually of the wiring, whether you're talking about athletes or musicians or dancers, what fires together gets wired together, okay? So that's Hebb's law. So if you're a violinist like Marie or violist, those circuits will be hardwired And we can now actually measure those nerve tracts and how big they get. So musical training, for example, makes your arcuate fasciculus massive, okay? But therefore the stress effects on those circuits, of course, are profound because that's how you make a living, but also psychologically, that's all you can do. You just can't take a violist and turn her into a golfer. It ain't gonna happen. Nor can you take a golfer, injured golfer, and turn him into a rock and roll singer. We have exceptions, but it's a pretty tough leap. So that wiring is very important to assess what's normal, and therefore the generic stress response will therefore express in its physical way. Okay, so well, that's what Performing Arts Medicine Association is looking at scientifically. That's what this organization is all about. It's an educational and scientific group, and which is growing, and we're going to collaborate. So my dream as president next year is to really focus on the hardcore science. We know the prevalence is about 70–80%, but we got to sort of dig into those factors. I just mentioned a whole bunch of factors, but I actually don't know whether it's because of their lousy lifestyle, chicken wings and beer, or is it the nature of their work, or is it the nature of the artistic, be the ball, be the notes. So all that stuff needs to be answered so we can actually target these prevention programs for the Aspen Music Festival and National Youth Orchestra. So those are really, they're very difficult questions to answer scientifically, and they're very expensive to design proper epidemiologic studies to look at that. So that's certainly what I want to bring in. Unfortunately, the freelance musician, you stop playing, you don't get paid. And often you don't get paid even if you play. So that's the nature of the beast. And there are no big contracts. There are no big Nikes and Gatorades in the biz. It's a very different kind of industry. So that's actually the difference between the injuries in artists and the injuries in athletes, because the nature of the business is different. That's the pressure on the doc. Okay, so I'll use anything: duct tape, modify the instrument. Of course, as a doc, I have all kinds of interesting concoctions, stir fries of medications to try to calm down that pain or stress response without all the side effects. Really be fairly confrontational about the issue, what's going on, and try to problem solve a way in which they can reduce their workload, repair the body, and return to work. So that's the occupational model. Unfortunately, the lifestyle of the performing artists at this time is not that great. We don't sleep very well because we gig late. We have our pizza and our beer and fool around till 5 in the morning. Oh, we got our day job at 8 o'clock. Oh, the kids got to go to school. So they're up at 8, ringing around. Then they got to do the business stuff. And then, of course, the bills come in, and it's pretty tight. So there's the kind of cyclical nature of the depletion that performing artists undergo. And we see that in athletics, and you guys have been very proactive of limiting practice schedules and all the things we've been talking about: rest breaks, proper nutrition, sleep routines, travel. Right? We're a bit behind in arts medicine. I was one of them, and still am to some degree. I grew up in Ontario. I went to the Royal Conservatory of Music. Glenn Gould was the hero at that time. He still is, and that's where I teach, as well as Vladimir Horowitz. So these are my heroes, not Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy, even though they are my heroes now. Okay, so I was pounding away, and I thought I could be cool and go to Carnegie Hall and be famous. I had the whole rock star thing down as a young prodigy. The problem is practicing 6 hours a day and speed racing the Wander Fantasy, which is one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire, basically tore up my right extensors. There was no musician's clinic, there was no help at that time. Went to the family doctor, there were bumps here, and my teacher said, well, you better take a year off, and then I got into composition and electronic music and the rest of my career. So I learned the hard way. It still hurts deep down, and I just can't go and play all the Beethoven sonatas and piano concertos. So when I come to Aspen, I think about that all the time, which fuels my energy about prevention. So we go to the National Youth Orchestra, I'm teaching at the Royal Conservatory, and going to the kids and saying, this is, you got to look after yourself. It's everybody's responsibility, and try to spread the word. That's a great question. Why on earth would a prodigy whose future looks good and being promised all kinds of things, good things to come my way, go and wreck himself? I thought about that and I said, well, it could have been testosterone, that magic hormone when I hit puberty. That's going to solve all my problems. I'll be popular. I'll get the cheerleader. I actually thought that, if you can believe it. Okay, learned the hard way. Correct, yes, my teacher is absolutely wonderful. He's a jock, he was an Olympic gymnast, but he didn't know. Okay, we didn't know that the same principles applied. So I can't blame him, I can't blame my parents. All they did was buy me a Steinway at 12, and I got full scholarships, so that's, so it's actually between these crazy ears of mine that didn't think that my body could say no, that there was a limit, because I honestly did not think there was a limit. The key thing is to listen to your body, okay? There's no absolute rules. One way that you can build up your body, build up your technique, we're into that, but also the way you look after yourself in terms of mind and body. And we know that in sports psychology, positive stuff, no negative self-talk. No slamming the clubs and stuff like that. But that's rampant here in music schools. And it's going to be a long time since some of the teaching methods turn, like, for example, in golf, everything's positive, be the ball, all those things you saw Rory do and not screw up in the final round of the British Open. So we're learning actually from sports medicine, but we want to cross-pollinate because we have some fun things that we can offer this sports medicine community too. Hearing loss is an excellent example of the hidden costs of performance stress. Okay, because for example, in the musicians, you don't even think about it in terms of the day-to-day overexposures, and then once you lose it, it's gone. Okay, and it's very sad. And I mean, this is what it's all about. If you can't hear, what's going to happen? So it's like a golfer, Nicholas. You can't see past 100 yards. It's a problem, right? When you're trying to image that shot. So there's absolutely no difference. The hearing loss, working with Marshall Chasen, who you interviewed, has been very active in the science of measuring the risks, and he'll speak about that tomorrow. But also how to prevent overexposure. Very, very simple things like risers, barriers, customized earplugs, which we tune. We've even got for the injured deaf musicians hearing aids. So that's the micro part of the hearing. So the big picture is trying to understand and prevent. So the organization, PAMA's now put out a statement with the National Association of Schools of Music that's just come out this week, and we're trying to push that and make it part of the accreditation of music schools, that they actually know what the exposures are to the kids. So again, the responsibility of the healthcare provider is to understand what the athlete or the artist is going through. And so the paradigm is really no different. The point is, if you're a sports doc, you may not really appreciate what goes on behind the scenes in ballet or a symphony orchestra. That's pretty easy. Just ask. What do you do? Just write it down. What's your work schedule? Just like what's your training schedule? Okay, and what's your lifestyle? It's really a piece of cake. And of course, when you're assessing the injured musician, when you might not know what a oboe is or a bassoon or, God forbid, some of these interesting world instruments, just they can bring it in. Right? They can play for you. They can explain to you why my thumb's sore playing clarinet. It's a no-brainer. But you can't do it without asking the question, what do you actually do? Okay, so same thing, how loud is it? So these are very simple, common sense, clinical pearls. And then everything follows in terms of your clinical logic. It's really not that difficult. The nature of the injury, in simple terms, sports is big muscles, music is small muscles, big and small. Yeah, but also in terms of the other stressors. There's differences, but so there's differences, big deal. So golf is, it's not big T trauma. It's, 99% between the ears, as we all know. And it's all in your touch. Yet, you see all the pro golfers now look huge, right? So that's how they drive the ball 340 yards, right? So there's a way of looking and studying the physiology of how you play violin concertos, right? It's going to look different, but in terms of the circuitry and the physiology required to do it, it's just different. Nothing that special, and therefore the rehab principles are much the same. Understand what the activity is, and then also connect with the artist. Okay, there's differences, but they're much the same. They are their performance. They are their last score. They are their handicap. Okay, and you have to connect with that. Otherwise, you know that in medicine, there's no therapeutic alliance. Nothing works. Okay, you got to feel essentially their stress, their pain, what they're going through, and then it's a piece of cake. Away you go. And your therapy team, the same principles applies. That therapeutic bond is really where the action is.